we're out of time, but let's thank again our wonderful panelists. And I'm going to turn it over to Joni for presiding on our final panel of the morning before lunch.
So I'm really thrilled to introduce this panel because they are the 2024 CCF Early Career Scholars, a group of young scholars that we are really excited about and proud of. And I also want to say one of those people was Vanessa, who you just heard from. We also, unfortunately, our fourth early career scholar couldn't be here today, but that's Hope Harvey at the University of Kentucky, who would have presented shared households as a safety net for older adults. So if that is a topic that's interesting to you, she studies people who double up shared housing, definitely look her up, Hope Harvey. But so I would like to turn it to our other two early career scholars. So we have Mia Brantley at North Carolina State University with her paper, Lord, Keep Them Safe, Lessons from Black Women's Motherwork-related Stress and Religious Coping.
I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to have room, but I said I'll bring it up here just in case I could figure it out. No, I think it's fine. Yes, this is perfect. And we'll just hope that it doesn't fall. There we go. Okay, good morning / almost afternoon, everyone. My name is Mia Brantley. I am an assistant professor of sociology at North Carolina State University. Just briefly, my research interests are at the intersection of race, gender, and family within the context of health. And so as a health and family scholar, I explore the multiple pathways that racism and racism-related stress impacts the health and well-being of Black families. And in this context of what I'm presenting to you today, Black mothers. So I'm going to discuss my presentation, which is entitled Lord, Keep Them Safe, Lessons from Black Women's Motherwork-related Stress and Religious Coping, which comes from a paper that I'm lead author on. But the broader ideas and conversation that I'm introducing is something that I explore and go to in deeper depth in a working book project that is tentatively titled, because we all know book titles change, which is tentatively titled Mothering on the Defense, the Care, Costs, and Coping of Black Mothers Across the Life Course. So I'll also be happy to talk about that during the Q&A as well. So I want to kind of spend a little bit of time here just to make sure, which I don't have a lot of it, but because I want to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page, right, when it comes to this background and understanding of some of this work. And so I have anti-Black racism in Black families, right? So when I'm talking about anti-Black racism, which I'll say over and over again, this is going to be specifically defined as the disdain for or disregard of those who are racialized as Black. And so because anti-Black racism is something that we see permeated within the United States, and we can also talk about a global context, we have this need for racial socialization within Black families. And so racial socialization is conceptualized in two ways. You have cultural socialization, so kind of giving cultural pride, passing that down to your children, but then you also have the preparation for bias, so warning children, protecting them from, teaching them how to navigate racism. And so this work is related to a lot of the Black family scholars, particularly Black motherhood scholars, who are really showing us the role of racism in shaping Black motherhood, or what we refer to as mothering while Black. And I'll kind of give a shout out to some of these scholars towards the end of the presentation. And so this is where the concept of mother work comes in, because it is closely connected to racial socialization. And it focuses on mothers of color, particularly in this context, Black women, are having to ensure the physical survival, the collective empowerment, and the identity of their families. And this is work, as you can imagine. So considering how this may contribute to stress, I consider this growing body of literature that highlights how racism is not solely shaping stress just because of direct experiences, so what I have personally experienced, but also what those of close others are experiencing. So once again, in this context, we're gonna be thinking about the experiences of Black children and how it's impacting their mothers. And so then when it comes to religious coping, so we have a number of scholars if med social, if we're thinking about mental health, right? All of these things who are reminding us of the importance of coping when it comes to stress, and particularly when it comes to Black families, the role of religion, right? So these scholars have introduced this concept to the research community, but there is also historically the recognition of how the church was a safe haven for Black people in the face of racialized violence. And additionally, with that, religion also allows for a number of tools that have been found to help Black families cope with stressors that they face. So once again, highlighting this multidimensionality of religion for coping. And so this project that I'm presenting to you today is marrying these three concepts to gain a deeper insight into how Black children's experiences of racism is impacting their mothers and how their mothers are coping. So the broad kind of research question that this is addressing is, what is the role of religion in shaping the perceived impact of mother-related stress on Black mothers' well-being? So in this particular paper, is pulling from the narratives of 26 predominantly middle-class Black mothers, and they had to have at least one child in adolescence or young adulthood. So just to kind of give you a brief, because I will skip this slide, so just to give you a kind of brief snapshot, the mothers were predominantly middle class, right? So the majority of them had at least a 4-year degree. The majority of them had mothers or were mothers of sons and daughters, and their children were an average age of 17 years old. So I'm going to move on to some of the findings here. So I would love to tell you about all of them, but I cannot. So what I will do is just give a brief snapshot. So mothers in this study were emphasizing a stress state that Black mothers are kind of feeling due to their children and the subsequent mother work that must be done to protect them. So for example, Deanne, who's the mother of a daughter and a son, who are 17 and 11, expresses the complex reality of mothering for Black women. So she says we have to be harder, we have to prepare them for the worst. I feel like other races, they probably prepare their kids, but I don't think they prepare them to the extent that we have to. And so Deanne is recognizing, yes, there's this shared experience of motherhood, but there's also particular aspects of mothering that is unique to Black women. And a lot of these mothers in the study were all of them either directly or indirectly were describing this stress using terms like stress, right? But also just saying like, this effort is a lot, it's burdensome, etc. So all of the mothers discuss religious coping as how they kind of address this stress, right? So I know I'm running on the 7-minute mark, so I will stop once I get there. Okay. So religious coping, like I said, all of the mothers were talking about religion as a coping strategy for them. And really, it was under this larger umbrella of religion being empowering. And this is important because all of the mothers identified anti-Black racism as inevitable for their families and particularly their children. And so this empowerment was necessary for them to continue on in their mothering practices and just being there for their families. So one aspect of this was through social support. So here, Mama Doc, who they all gave themselves pseudonyms, Mama Doc, who is the mother of a son and a daughter, talked about how the social support that she gains from religion is really important for her. So she says, I definitely have a network of women who are within my church that I ask for their input or advice or just guidance around being a mother. Like, I just find that really helpful. And so this is coming on the heels of me asking her, how does she kind of manage the stress that she experiences from her mothering and her motherhood? And similarly, there was also emotion management. So mothers relying on other religious tools to kind of recognize the importance of managing their emotions during this time. Okay. No, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. I know, that's good. So I'm gonna run through these last two, and then through the Q&A, I will talk specifically about the lessons that I learned. So with that, I'll just run through this. So with the emotion management, she talked about religious texts, prayer, things like that, allowing her to kind of manage the emotions that arise, anger, sadness, etc. when it comes to the stress that she experiences in the wake of her children's exposure to racism. And then lastly, the mothers talked about agency being really important when it comes to religious tools. So being able to pray, understanding that they're feeling these feelings of helplessness, but also recognizing that religion is providing them some sort of control, whether that's through prayer or whether that's through just other sorts of tools that they're gaining through religion, but being able to kind of rely on that in the wake of their stress. And so I had some lessons that I was going to talk about. I will talk about them during the Q&A. I know, I was thinking because it was just two of us.
No, I know, but
no, that's all good.
She adjusted it. I wish. So now we have Jamie O'Quinn speaking on their research, How Can I Get Out of Here? Early Marriage as an Escape from Family Violence. 5 minutes is hard, y'all.
Oh, no, sorry. Mia is being very generous and letting me use her laptop for my notes as well. So all good, but I appreciate you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here at a time when I think it's so important for family scholars to be meeting and for family scholarship to be in the forefront of our thoughts as we are currently in a country that is funding a genocide in Gaza and one that is in particular targeting Palestinian children and families. So I'm very happy to be with you today. So when I began this research project back in 2016, early marriage involving individuals under the age of 18 was often referred to as child marriage, but I don't use that term. It was legal in all 50 states. And today it's legal in 37 states. And contrary to the widespread belief that minors no longer get married in the US, over 300,000 were married between 2000 and 2018 alone. And approximately 78% of those cases include young women marrying men who are legal adults. And one of the forces driving the recent changes in the legislative landscape, with more states banning early marriage now than ever before, is this rise of political organizing that frames the marriage of minors as a human rights violation. The image shown above was shared on social media in 2021 by Unchained at Last, an organization dedicated to ending forced and early marriage in the United States. And it reads, "Child marriage increases risk of experiencing violence." And this is true. Research on early marriage in the US is scarce, but research on early marriage in other countries, which is predominantly done on countries in the global south, shows that early marriage has negative consequences for young women's life outcomes, including the risk of violence. But in my life history interviews with 34 women who were married as minors in the US, I found another piece of the puzzle that I felt was missing in these discourses. And I found that for many of my participants, violence, in fact, provided a pathway to early marriage, meaning marriage itself was a consequence rather than a cause of violence. And unsurprisingly, I found that the processes through which this happened were deeply gendered and racialized. So I don't have time to go into my demographics and my methods, so I would love to talk about it more in the Q&A. I just want to bring our attention to one demographic point in particular, which is that overwhelmingly my participants were white, right around 3/4 of them. There's a few reasons why that is, but we don't have time to talk about it now. But so I'm interested in how whiteness shapes young people's experiences of early marriage. There you go. So most of my participants experienced violence or abuse in their early childhood on behalf of family or community members, including witnessed violence, physical violence, sexual violence, incest, emotional abuse, economic abuse, and extreme neglect. And it's outside of the scope of this paper to talk about why that is and to explore the various forms of violence that they experienced. But rather, I focus on women's understandings of avenues out of violence. And there are really few options available to minors to escape family violence: becoming legally emancipated, seeking support through the child welfare system, running away, and joining the military or getting married, the latter two of which require parental approval in most states. None of my participants joined the military as an option for escaping violence, although a few mentioned other family members who had done so. And the women I spoke to also didn't seek legal emancipation, but some became emancipated automatically as a result of becoming married. There are a lot of reasons why young people might not get emancipated. We don't have time now, but it requires a lot of economic and cultural capital to do so, including being able to retain an attorney and convince a judge that you can provide for yourself. So they didn't do this. But a few also attempted to run away, but when you are an unemancipated minor, doing so leaves you vulnerable to being found by the police and either being returned home or put into the foster care system. So that leaves this last avenue, which is what's called the so-called child welfare system. So I identify 3 narratives that the women expressed for understanding marriage as a viable option for escaping violence. And I want to note that these narratives are not mutually exclusive at all, but rather were often expressed simultaneously. So the so-called child welfare system, which I and other feminist abolitionists call the family policing system. This includes CPS, Child Protective Services, as well as the foster care system. Research has shown over and over again that the system is not designed to actually protect children, as is widely believed, but collaborates with police and prisons to oppress marginalized families, in particular Black and Indigenous families, through the incarceration of parents and forced removal of children from homes. And so research on the family policing system shows that the carceral state disproportionately criminalizes and separates Black and Indigenous families that are overwhelmingly not sites of violence and abuse, therefore leaving them without safe sources of social support if and when abuse does occur. And my research builds on this literature by demonstrating that the family policing system, surprisingly, also does nothing to protect young women in white families that are sites of violence and abuse, contributing to feminist abolitionist calls for community responses to family violence outside of the carceral state. And I call the second narrative that my participants identified family genealogies of child marriage or early marriage, which refers to the process through which the marriage of minors becomes normalized within families across generations as a solution to a variety of social problems like poverty and adolescent pregnancy. And here, this is building off of Gloria Gonzalez-Lopez's research on what she calls family genealogies of incest, to describe how sexual violence and inequality are reproduced within Mexican families across and within generations. And I know I'm out of time, so the last narrative is the fulfillment of romantic and sexual desires. For these women, getting married as a minor represented a way for them to escape their violent family homes while also being able to move in with their boyfriend or partner. Many described marriage as a means to fulfill what they called a Cinderella fantasy, and at the crux of this fantasy lies the belief that women and girls from across social locations can escape gender-based violence through conforming to a white, patriarchal, heteronormative middle-class ideal, such as getting married to a different gender partner, traditionally a cis het man. And my participants' experiences of family violence as a pathway to marriage were further shaped by other social institutions that we don't have time to talk about. So big takeaway, we need systems of support for young people outside of patriarchal institutions like marriage, the family, and the criminal legal system. Thank you.
Okay, we have 1.5 minutes for questions. So, questions for Jamie or Mia, please come up. And maybe we can try to take at least like one for each of them, and then if we have to break for lunch, you can all come up and ask them questions on your own, and they can answer your questions. So yes, please.
I have a question for Jamie. I'm curious, you're talking about kind of pathways out of violence, but I'm just wondering on that point number 2, did your participants identify kind of push factors into marriage as like pregnancy, or these are young girls, rape, statutory rape, and it's just changing it's a pathway of one type of violence to another? Was that,
Yeah.
well, first of all, I see it that way, but I don't know if they saw it that way or if that was even empirically true in your data?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that in many cases, young women were substituting one form of family violence for another form of family violence. So many of the young women I spoke to entered marriages that then ended up being violent, whether or not they were in the relationship prior to becoming married. Many experienced sexual or physical violence within their marriages, but not all did. But in terms of violence kind of being a catalyst towards marriage, there are really few options for minors who really lack like legal and political autonomy to be able to leave their homes, and marriage was one way to do so. Marriage, for folks who don't know, also provides a legal exemption to statutory rape in the United States. So a relationship that would be considered statutory rape is automatically considered legal consent once the two individuals are married. So, right, our laws are not actually created to protect young people. There's nothing that magically happens in someone's brain that gives them the capability to consent once they're married. Just like there's nothing that magically happens when someone turns 18, right? Developmentally, cognitively, folks are the same person. But this is kind of the legal workaround for these things. So I'd say it's complicated, and in many cases this was true that they experienced other forms of family violence within their marriages.
Kanaba?
Yes, my question is for Mia. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering if you explored whether the mothers, their relationship with religion prior to having children, and if this is something that this was a child's relationship with church and going to religion, and then they returned to it, or something that was consistent with ours. And also, you said that you focus on middle class women and how that form of like a social structure may influence, their mothering being in spaces where their children may be the only, or they may be the only mother in their spaces. How would it interact with that?
Yeah, I think so. For the first question, religion seemed pretty salient in all of their lives. They talked about their mothers raising them in a religious context, right? So that wasn't something that was new when they kind of had children. I think, at least for a few of the mothers, how they engage with it became a little different once they started to have children, right? This idea of like praying for covering and praying for protection. Those things arose and had them engaging with religion in a very different way. To your other question around how class changes the context, it absolutely does, right? There were several mothers who talked about how their child was the only one, right? A lot of the racialized violence, which was one of the lessons that I took from them, that I will just say here, right, of this idea of policies are important, but communities are too. I think that was something that was shared, or at least alluded to with panel 2 as well, right? But a lot of the violence that the mothers were talking about wasn't always physical, but it was related to policy, right? Mm-hmm. Policies in their schools, HOAs in their neighborhoods, mm-hmm. right? Like these very violent contexts that they're unfortunately having to put their children in, and the tensions that would also arise in that, right? I think Dawn Dow talks about that in her book, Mothering While Black, this idea that I want a good education for my child. I also don't want them to be the only one and face like this form of racism, right? Mm-hmm. So having to figure out what is best, right, for your child, and the stress that gets produced from that, right? So it absolutely changes the context. It changes how the mothers are engaging, the recognition and the language that they're able to utilize. So right, one mom was like, yeah, these institutions are racist, right? And she started to kind of go into the different ways that they are, where other mothers would just allude to it, right? So they're kind of like, yeah, like there's some things there in school that like we don't really like, and it's like it was very easy for me to identify, like, oh, this is what's happening, right? But the language wasn't always there for some moms. And so I think, so class absolutely contextualizes the experience, and religion seemed pretty salient in all of their lives. Thank you for that question.
Since they're still setting up the food, we're lucky. And I saw Cameron's hand, right?
Yeah, I had a question for you. I don't even know if this was a question you considered to ask, but is there anything denominationally that was different or levels of religiosity that made some outcomes more prominent?
Yeah. So I think I hesitate only because I don't want to start talking quantitatively about
Right.
these moms in this very qualitative context, right? But what I will say is that the majority of them spoke about the Bible, spoke about like a Christian sort of religion, right? But there were others who didn't specify a sort of higher power, if you will, but they would just kind of say higher power. They were like really, it was only a few of them, but they weren't really specifying any sort of denomination, but it was just like, I'm praying to a higher power, I'm giving this up to a higher power because it's too heavy for me, right? Like these sorts of things. But the outcomes were pretty salient regardless of, right, like whether it was social support, whether it was feelings of agency, like regaining agency in a context of helplessness, essentially. Those things were all the same, regardless of whether they gave a specific denomination or not. Mm-hmm.
Barbara.
Thank you both for really interesting presentation. I'd like to ask about, I was interested in the study of mothers, about they all mentioned religious coping, and I wondered your recruitment strategy. Mm-hmm. You know, how you recruited these women.
Yeah, so, and so this is a smaller subset of the larger sample, right? So these are only the mothers who talked about religion that I wrote this paper from. So this is 26 out of 35 total who talked about religion as coping. So still a pretty good chunk, right, of the women. But as far as not coping strategies, as far as recruitment strategies goes, I literally did anything that I could, right? So we're thinking social media and hashtags, Black mom, Black family, etc. I'm reaching out to Jack and Jill. I'm reaching out, which is also why we get some middle classers, right? So 100 National Coalition of 100 Black Women. I'm reaching out to local organizations in different states who work with more working class moms and things like that. I'm reaching out to the Black Mamas Matters Alliance in Atlanta and see if they could, right? So I'm doing everything that I can, as well as, hey, can you please pass this flyer to a friend, right? Like everything. And so I think thinking about context. So these interviews were conducted from 2019 to 2021. We all know what happened in 2020. So I think that also shapes the class of the mothers, right? There were only, the middle class mothers were the moms who were working from home mostly, or who were already, had the flexibility to be able to interview with me. So that also shaped some of that as well. But I see the food is set up, so I'm happy to talk about this during lunch and things like that. But thank you for that question.
Yes, the lunch is ready. So please enjoy until I think it's 1:20. We have time to eat, and you can chat and ask questions of panelists. Enjoy.